The alien queen thought he was ordinary. Until his true power shattered her world. The alarm did not sound like an alarm. It was a low hum, almost polite, the kind of sound a machine makes when it wants your attention but does not want to cause a fuss. Cole Hargrove heard it from inside the engine bay of the cargo ship Delmar Cross, where he was halfway through replacing a cracked fuel valve seal. He did not jump. He did not drop his wrench. He finished tightening the seal, wiped his hands on the rag tucked into his belt, and then looked up at the small status screen mounted above the access panel. The screen showed a single blinking red marker. Something large was outside the ship. Something very large. Cole climbed out of the access hatch slowly and walked down the narrow corridor toward the main deck. The Delmar Cross was a small vessel, 12 crew, mostly cargo workers and 2 administrative staff. It was not a military ship. It carried machine parts, building materials, and food supplies between outer settlements. There was nothing special about it. Cole had worked on it for 3 years and liked it precisely because nothing special ever happened. That was about to change. When he reached the main deck, the other crew members were already there. Some were pressed against the observation window. Some were standing very still. One woman, Pam Hollis from Cargo Sorting, was gripping the wall railing with both hands and breathing fast. Cole walked past all of them and looked out the window. The ship outside was enormous. It was dark gray and shaped like something between a blade and a hammer, with long curved sections running along its sides like ribs on a massive animal. Lights moved along its hull in patterns that did not look random. They looked like language. Cole stood at the window for a moment, studying it. Then he went back to get his toolkit. Dara Osei, who handled administrative work and communications for the Delmar Cross, found him in the storage corridor pulling on his work vest and checking the pockets. She was 28 years old, sharp-eyed, and usually the calmest person in any room. Right now she looked like she was working very hard at being calm. She said, "Cole, there is an alien warship next to us." He said, "I know." She said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Getting my tools." She stared at him. He zipped the vest closed and looked at her. His face was not blank, it was simply settled, the way a man's face gets when he has decided what to do and has stopped wasting energy on worry. He said, "We do not know what they want. If they board us, it is better to look like what we are, workers. Not threats. Not scared rabbits. Workers." Dara looked at the toolkit in his hand. Then she straightened her own jacket and said, "All right." The boarding happened 20 minutes later. There was no explosion, no dramatic cutting of metal. The outer hull of the Delmar Cross simply opened, as if the alien ship had reached out and unlocked it from the outside. The crew gathered on the main deck because there was nowhere else to go. Cole stood near the back. Dara stood beside him. The first alien that came through the hatch was tall, at least 2.5 meters, with a long angular body, dark plating along its shoulders and upper chest, and 4 arms arranged in pairs. Its face was narrow with 2 large flat eyes that caught the light and held it. It wore something that looked like a uniform. Behind it came 6 more, all carrying devices that could have been weapons or could have been something else. The crew of the Delmar Cross did not know. The devices looked dangerous, so everyone treated them as weapons. Most of the crew stepped back. One man pressed himself against the far wall and made a small sound. Pam Hollis had stopped breathing loudly, which was possibly worse. Dara stayed very still. Cole did not move at all. The lead alien looked across the room. Its eyes moved slowly, taking in each person. When its gaze reached Cole, it stopped. Cole met its eyes and held them. Not in challenge. Not in fear. Just looking, the way you look at something you are trying to understand. The alien tilted its head very slightly. Then it spoke. The language was layered and strange, full of sounds that seemed to come from more than one place at once. None of the humans understood a word of it. But the meaning was clear enough, they were to move toward the hatch. Cole raised his hand, not urgently, just to be seen. He pointed to his toolkit. Then he pointed to himself. Then he made a small gesture that could only mean one thing: should I bring this? The alien looked at the toolkit. Then it looked at Cole. Something passed across its face that was not quite recognition and not quite confusion. It made a short sound and turned toward the hatch. Cole took that as a yes and followed. On the alien ship, the 12 crew members of the Delmar Cross were walked through corridors that were wider and taller than anything humans built. The walls were covered in the same light patterns Cole had seen from outside. He watched them as he walked. He did not do this obviously. He kept his eyes forward most of the time, but every few seconds he let his gaze slide sideways and pick up another piece of the pattern. Repeating sequences. Directional markers. A counting system embedded in the color changes. He was not sure of any of this yet. But he filed it. They were brought to a large room with smooth white walls and very bright light. There were tables, or things that served the function of tables, and the crew was directed to sit on low benches along the wall. Other aliens moved through the room with purpose, carrying instruments Cole did not recognize. Then the testing began. It was not violent. It was thorough. The aliens moved from person to person with calm efficiency, holding instruments near their heads, their hands, their eyes. Some instruments made soft sounds. Some produced small lights. It was like being processed. Like being inventoried. When one of the aliens reached Cole, it held a flat device near his temple and moved it slowly. The device made a series of sounds, low, medium, 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 then a high sharp tone that made the alien pause. It looked at the device. It adjusted a setting and ran it again. The same result. The same high tone. The alien made a note. Then it moved on. Cole watched it go. He had no way of knowing what the device measured. He had no way of knowing what the high tone meant. But he noticed that the alien had recalibrated before running the test again. That meant the first result had surprised it. He filed that too. Dara leaned close to him and whispered, "What do you think they want?" Cole spoke quietly. "Information. They want to know what we are before they decide what to do with us." She said, "And what will they decide?" He was quiet for a moment. The bright lights hummed above them. Around them, the crew of the Delmar Cross sat pale and frightened and very still. Cole said, "That depends on how interesting we turn out to be." He looked around the room again. He counted the exits. He noted where the aliens stood and where they moved. He looked at the light patterns on the walls and here and compared them to what he had seen in the corridor. More pieces. More data. All of it quiet. All of it patient. None of the aliens looked at him twice. He was just a small, plain-faced man with a toolkit and a work vest, sitting on a bench at the edge of the room. That was exactly how he wanted it. The alien queen thought he was ordinary. Until his true power shattered her world. The holding room smelled like metal and something faintly sweet, like a chemical trying to imitate fruit and not quite managing it. Cole did not know what made the smell. He added it to the list of things he did not know yet and moved on. There were 11 of them in the room now. One of the Delmar Cross crew, a man named Gary who ran the cargo manifests, had been taken somewhere else by 2 of the aliens about an hour after they arrived. No one knew where. No one said much about it. The remaining 11 sat on the smooth benches and waited. Cole used the time well. He counted ceiling panels. 18 in this room. The panels in the corridor outside had been different, thinner, arranged in overlapping rows. He looked at the light strips along the base of the walls. They pulsed every 4 seconds, very faintly, in a rhythm that reminded him of breathing. He looked at the door, a wide sliding panel with no visible handle, no keypad, no lock mechanism he could see. It had opened twice since they arrived, once to let Gary out, once to let a single alien in who stood near the far wall and watched them for about 10 minutes before leaving. Both times, the door had made no sound. It simply moved. He thought about what kind of mechanism could do that quietly. Magnetic, probably. Or something using a principle he did not have a name for yet. Dara was sitting beside him. She had been keeping her voice low and talking to 2 of the other crew members, trying to keep them from spiraling. She was good at that, reading people, giving them small things to hold on to. Cole appreciated it. It meant he did not have to do it, and he was not very good at it anyway. After a while she turned to him and said quietly, "They moved us from the first ship to this one. This one is bigger." Cole nodded. He had noticed. The corridors here were wider. The ceiling height was different. The light patterns on the walls were more complex. She said, "Do you think this is their main ship?" He said, "I think it is their important ship. Not sure if it is the main one. But important people are on it." The ones who were escorting us had different markings on their uniforms than the ones who boarded the Delmar Cross. Dara looked at him. "You noticed the uniform markings?" "Rank markings," he said. "The boarding team had 2 lines here." He touched his own left shoulder. "The escorts here have 3. The one who stood in the room and watched us had 4. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been doing that?" He said, "Since we got on the first ship." She did not say anything else for a while. Cole went back to looking at the room. Gary came back about 2 hours later. He looked shaken but not hurt. He sat down heavily and said they had put him in a smaller room by himself and asked him questions through some kind of translation device, a small box that turned their layered alien speech into rough, awkward standard. The questions were simple. What was his job? How old was he? What did he eat? Did he have a family? Basic things. He had answered all of them. Then they brought him back. Cole listened carefully. When Gary was done, Cole asked him one question: had they tested him with any instruments? Gary said yes. The flat device near his head, same as before. And a second one he had not seen in the first room, something they held near his hands. Cole thought about that. The door opened again the next morning, or what he estimated was morning, since there were no windows and the light did not change. An alien came in and gestured for Cole and Dara to follow. Just the 2 of them. They were walked down 2 corridors and into a room that was noticeably larger and more organized than anything they had been in before. There were workstations along the walls with screens full of data, symbols Cole could not read but could see were structured. Tables in the middle. More aliens, these ones in lighter-colored uniforms, who moved with the focused energy of people who had work to do. One of them approached with the small translation box Gary had described. It was a flat gray rectangle that the alien held between them. When the alien spoke, a flat mechanical voice came out of the box a moment later, speaking standard. It said, "You are assigned to maintenance work on this vessel. Your skills have been assessed. You will be shown your work area. You will not go to other areas without permission. Do you understand?" Cole said, "Yes." "Can I bring my tools?" The alien looked at the toolkit still hanging from his belt. A pause. Then it said, through the box, "Yes." Cole said, "Thank you." The alien did not respond to that. It turned and walked, and Cole and Dara followed. The maintenance level of the ship was deep in the hull. It was louder there, a constant low vibration came up through the floor from whatever engines ran this ship. The pipes and conduits running along the walls were thick and densely packed, some of them warm to the touch, some of them cold. It was cramped in places, wide in others, and it smelled like machine oil and heat and something metallic that was not quite rust. Cole felt immediately comfortable. He was shown a small work area near a junction of 3 major conduits. An alien worker, lower rank, judging by the single line on the shoulder, pointed to a set of tools on a shelf and then at the conduits and made a sweeping gesture that meant, roughly, "These are yours now." Cole set down his own toolkit, picked up one of the alien tools, and turned it over in his hands. It was longer than what he was used to, with a grip shaped for a hand with more fingers than his. He tried holding it 2 different ways. The second way worked better. He put it down and picked up the next one. The alien worker watched him do this with something that might have been curiosity or might have been suspicion. Cole did not look up. He worked through the tools one at a time, understanding each one before moving on to the next. He was not performing helpfulness. He was genuinely interested. He had always been interested in how things worked, even things he had never seen before. Dara was assigned to a different section, administrative sorting, which meant she spent her days surrounded by data tablets he could not yet read, filing them into categories an alien supervisor indicated with hand gestures. She was smart enough to understand the system within a day and a half, which seemed to surprise the supervisor. Cole spent his first full day just watching. He did his assigned tasks, cleaning filters, checking seal pressures, replacing a worn connector on a secondary line. All simple work. While he did it, he watched the larger system around him. He looked at where the conduits connected. He traced the flow of whatever moved through them by touching the pipes at different points and feeling for warmth or vibration. He noted which sections hummed and which were quiet. On the second day, he found the first inefficiency. It was in the fuel flow regulation for the secondary propulsion system. A valve was cycling too fast, which meant fuel was moving through the line in short pulses instead of a steady stream. It was not dangerous. It was just wasteful. The system compensated by drawing slightly more overall. Not a lot. Over a long voyage, though, it would add up. Cole did not fix it. Not yet. He wrote it down in his notebook, the small paper notebook he had asked for on the first day, which the alien supervisor had given him with an expression that suggested amusement at the primitive request. He wrote it in plain notes, nothing coded, just observations. Valve cycling rate. Secondary line. Junction 4. He went home to the small shared sleeping room where the Delmar Cross crew had been placed and lay on the flat mat they had given him and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the ship above him. He thought about its systems, its rhythms, its patterns. He thought about how a machine this large was also a kind of argument. It said, "We are powerful, we are organized, we know what we are doing." Every ship said that. And every ship, if you knew where to look, also told you where it was uncertain. Cole was very good at finding where things were uncertain. He closed his eyes and let the hum of the engines carry him toward sleep. Tomorrow he would look at the third junction. He had a feeling about the third junction. The alien queen thought he was ordinary. Until his true power shattered her world. Commander Zethrael had not become head of flagship security by ignoring small things. He had held his position for 11 years by treating every small thing as a possible large thing in disguise. So when the ship's efficiency report showed an unexplained 4% improvement in secondary propulsion fuel consumption, he did not file it as variance and move on. He pulled the maintenance logs for the past 2 weeks and went through them line by line. The change had happened during a routine maintenance window. One valve adjustment on a secondary fuel flow regulator. No work order had been raised for it. No supervisor had authorized it. It had simply been done, quietly, by whoever was working near Junction 4 that day. Zethrael looked at the crew assignment records for that shift. The human. The one called Cole. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called up the full record on the human, the classification data from the survey ship, the behavioral notes from the processing room, the maintenance supervisor's daily logs. He read everything. It did not take long. There was not much there. The notes were mostly variations of the same observation. Subject performs assigned tasks without issue. No problems. No incidents. But there was one line in the processing room report, added as a footnote by one of the analysts, that Zethrael read 3 times. It said, pattern recognition score was flagged as anomalous. Test was recalibrated and run again. Second result matched first. Filed as possible equipment error. Zethrael filed a report to Queen Velshera recommending a re-evaluation of the human asset. He used careful language. He said, anomalous competence. He did not say what he was actually thinking, which was something closer to, I do not know what this creature is, and I am not comfortable not knowing. Velshera read the report and sent back 3 words through her administrative aide, no action required. Zethrael read those 3 words. He filed them. And he started watching Cole himself. Cole, meanwhile, had found the second inefficiency. It was in the water recirculation system on the lower maintenance deck, a pressure imbalance between 2 of the distribution lines that was causing one line to work harder than the other. Over time, the harder working line would wear faster. It was the kind of thing that got missed because it did not cause any immediate problem. The system still worked. But it was working unevenly, and uneven wear meant one line would fail before the other, which meant an unscheduled repair somewhere down the road. Cole fixed the pressure balance during a scheduled filter replacement. It took him 4 extra minutes. He wrote the fix in his notebook. He had also, by this point, introduced himself to the other workers on the maintenance level. This had taken time. The Dominari workers did not seem to know what to make of him. They were not cruel, they were simply indifferent, the way people are indifferent to furniture. Cole did not push. He just showed up every day, did his work, and occasionally said something simple through the translation box that had been assigned to his work area. He asked the names of tools he did not recognize. He thanked people when they showed him where something was kept. He did small things right without being asked, refilling a supply tray that had run low, returning borrowed equipment to its exact original place. After 10 days, the 3 Dominari maintenance workers on his section had gone from ignoring him to occasionally glancing in his direction when they had a question about a lower deck system. He had the best knowledge of the lower decks by now. Not because he was special. Because he had been paying attention longer. Dara noticed all of this. She made a point of eating with Cole whenever their schedules allowed, which was not often, but often enough. One evening she sat across from him in the small shared meal room and said, "You have friends down there." Cole looked up from his food, a bland, dense block of something the Dominari had decided was nutritionally sufficient for humans. "Not friends," he said. "Not yet. But they stopped looking past me." She said, "Is there a difference?" He said, "There is a big difference. Being seen is the first step. Everything else comes after." She watched him eat for a moment. Then she said, "Cole, what are we doing here? I mean, what are you actually doing?" He was quiet. He turned the block of food over with his fork. Then he said, "We are in someone else's house. We did not choose to be here. We cannot fight our way out. We cannot run. So the only thing that makes sense is to make ourselves useful enough that they do not want to throw us away." She said, "And if they do not care about useful?" He said, "Every intelligent species cares about useful. It is one of the things that makes them intelligent." She thought about that. Then she said, "What about the other crew? Pam and Gary and the rest?" Cole said, "I am working on that too. It is slower. But I am working on it." She did not ask him to explain. She had learned by now that Cole's explanations came when things were ready, not before. It was around this time that Zethrael called Cole in for a direct meeting. The meeting room was plain and well lit. Zethrael sat on one side of a low table. Cole sat on the other. The translation box sat between them. For a moment neither of them said anything. Zethrael studied Cole the way Cole studied machines, looking for the thing that was not immediately obvious. Then Zethrael said, "Through the box, the fuel valve. Junction 4. You changed it." Cole said, "Yes." Zethrael said, "No work order. No authorization." Cole said, "I know. I should have asked first. I did not think it would matter because it was a small thing. I will ask first next time." Zethrael looked at him. He said, "How did you know it needed changing?" Cole said, "The valve was cycling too fast. I could feel it in the pipe, a tap 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 instead of a steady pressure. It means the flow is pulsing. That wastes fuel." Zethrael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You felt it in the pipe?" Cole said, "Yes." Another silence. Zethrael looked down at the table. Something was moving behind his flat alien eyes that was not easy to name. It was not quite discomfort. It was more like the feeling a person gets when they pick up something they thought was light and discover it has real weight. He said, "Is there anything else on this ship you have noticed?" Cole held his gaze. He said, "A few things." "Do you want me to write them down?" Zethrael sent his report to Velshera that same evening. This time he used different language. He did not say anomalous competence. He said, "Recommend immediate full behavioral review." He listed the valve fix, the pressure adjustment he had discovered by reviewing the logs more carefully, and 4 other small interventions Cole had made that no one had noticed until Zethrael went looking. He ended the report with a single sentence, "We do not fully understand what this creature is doing, but it is doing it deliberately." Velshera read the report in her quarters. She was sitting at her wide desk, surrounded by the work of running an empire, trade agreements, fleet movements, colony reports. She read Zethrael's words and felt, for the first time in a very long time, a small and irritating pinch of something she could not immediately name. She read the report again. She set it down. She looked out at the stars through her viewport for a moment. Then she picked up the report and read it a third time. She approved the full behavioral review. On the maintenance level, Cole was in the middle of his third week aboard the ship. He was lying on his back beneath a coolant junction, checking the insulation on a secondary line, when his notebook slipped from his vest pocket and landed open on the floor beside him. He picked it up. The page it had opened to was covered in neat, small writing. Systems notes. Observations. Questions he had not answered yet. The number of entries had grown considerably. He tucked it back into his pocket, zipped it shut, and went back to checking the insulation. Above him, somewhere in the upper decks of the ship, a queen was beginning to ask questions she had not thought to ask before. The alien queen thought he was ordinary. Until his true power shattered her world. The behavioral review took 2 full days. Cole cooperated with all of it. He answered every question put to him through the translation box, clearly and without hesitation. He allowed the instruments near his head again. He performed the tasks they asked of him, sorting objects by an unknown rule, tracing patterns, solving a simple physical puzzle with pieces shaped for alien hands. He did not pretend to fail. He did not pretend to be less than he was. He just answered what was asked and did what was shown. When it was over, the analysts filed their report and sent it to WorldHFY. She read it in her private quarters with the door sealed. She read it from beginning to end, which took some time because it was thorough. When she finished, she sat very still for a moment and then read the last page again. The report said that in 6 weeks aboard the flagship, the human called Cole had formed cooperative relationships with workers from 4 other captive species on the maintenance level. He had identified and corrected 6 systemic inefficiencies across 3 ship systems. He had mapped, through observation alone, approximately 90% of the areas he had access to, and had shown detailed knowledge of the ship's layout in the sorting tasks he was asked to complete. He had done none of this by breaking any rule, raising any alarm, or behaving in any way that would have flagged an automatic alert. The final line of the report read, "Subject has been operating with strategic purpose since the first day aboard. We do not know the full scope of his goal." WorldHFY set the report down on her desk. She looked at it. Then she made a decision that felt like the right one and was, in fact, the wrong one. She ordered Cole isolated. He was moved from the shared sleeping room to a single small room with no windows and a locked door. His notebook was taken. His toolkit was taken. His access to the maintenance level was suspended. He was given food and water and nothing else. He did not protest. He sat on the mat in the center of the room and waited. The ship began to come apart almost immediately. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet, grinding way that things fall apart when the small corrections stop happening. The first sign was the food distribution. Cole had been manually adjusting the automated sorting on the captive labor meal line every 3rd cycle, a small correction that compensated for an error in the system that caused certain food types to be skipped. Nobody had asked him to do it. Nobody had known he was doing it. When he stopped, one section of the captive labor population began receiving the same 4 food items in rotation while 2 other items piled up in the wrong storage bay. By the 2nd day there was significant distress in the lower decks. By the 3rd day, 2 groups of captives from different species, who had been in a state of fragile peace for weeks, partly because Cole had quietly arranged for them never to be in the same corridor at the same time, were suddenly eating in the same area at the same time. The situation escalated quickly. Zethrael spent most of that night restoring order. When it was done, he stood in the empty corridor outside the lower captive levels and felt the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a cold current. The second sign was the pressure imbalance that returned in the water recirculation system. The valve Cole had balanced weeks ago had drifted back out of alignment because no one else knew it needed regular adjustment. It was a minor thing on its own. But the maintenance crew on that level had also been subtly guided by Cole over the past weeks. He had shown them, without making a show of it, how to approach certain tasks more efficiently. With him gone, they fell back on their old habits. 3 small things went wrong in the same week. None of them critical. All of them adding up. On the 4th day of Cole's isolation, Zethrael went to WorldHFY. He had been in service to the Dominari crown for his entire adult life. He had never walked into the Queen's chamber to tell her she had made an error. He was aware, as he walked those corridors, that he might not walk out of them with his position intact. He had decided it did not matter. Some things needed to be said. Velshera listened without interrupting. Zethrael laid out everything: the food system, the water system, the fragile peace among the captives that had quietly frayed, the 4 other small things he had identified since Cole was removed. He presented it not as an accusation but as a simple record of what had happened and what it implied. He said, "We do not have a word for what he was doing. But there is a word for what the ship is doing without him. It is declining." Velshera was quiet for a long time. She said, "He was doing all of this without being asked." Zethrael said, "Yes." She said, "Without authorization. Without a plan we gave him." Zethrael said, "He had his own plan." Another silence. She turned to look out the viewport at the stars. The stars did not offer any guidance. They rarely did. She said, "If I release him, I am admitting that a Class 0 creature made himself necessary on the most advanced vessel in the Dominari fleet." Zethrael said, "You are admitting what is already true. The only question is whether you admit it before more things go wrong or after." Velshera did not answer right away. She stood at the viewport for several more minutes. Then she turned, walked to her desk, and pressed a single command into her console. Cole's door unlocked. But she did not simply release him and pretend nothing had happened. She summoned him to her chamber. Cole had been told in advance this time, given a few hours to prepare. He had been given back his toolkit and his notebook. He checked both before he went. The notebook was intact. All the pages were still there. The aliens had read it, certainly. He did not mind. He had written nothing in it that he was not willing to share. Velshera's chamber was the largest room he had been in on the ship. The viewport here stretched almost the full length of one wall. Stars moved past it slowly. She was standing when he entered, which surprised him slightly. He had expected her to be seated, in a position of authority. Standing meant she had not yet decided how she wanted this to go. He stood across from her. The translation box sat on the low table between them. Neither of them sat. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. She said, "Through the box, you have been on this ship for 6 weeks." He said, "Yes." She said, "In that time, you made yourself useful to us in ways we did not ask for and did not notice." He said, "I tried to be helpful." She said, "That is not the same thing." He looked at her. She was right, and he knew she was right, and the fact that she understood the difference told him something important about her. He said, "No. It is not the same thing." She said, "What do you want?" He said, "I want to go home. All of us. Every person from the Delmar Cross." She said, "And if I say no?" He did not answer immediately. He looked out the viewport at the stars for a moment. Then he looked back at her and said, "Then I would like to know what happens next. Because I think you already know you are going to say yes. I think that is why you are standing up." The room was very quiet. The hum of the engines came up through the floor. The stars moved slowly past the viewport. Velshera looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. It was not anger. It was something more complicated than anger. It was the expression of someone who has just understood something they would have preferred not to understand. She said, "I need to think." Cole said, "Of course." He paused. "I have 17 system improvements written in my notebook. If you decide to let us go, I will share all of them before we leave." She looked at the notebook in his hand. He held it up, just briefly, then put it back in his vest pocket. He said, "Good night." He turned and walked back toward the door. Behind him, he heard nothing. No command. No objection. He walked back to his room and sat down on the mat and opened his notebook to a fresh page. He began to write. The alien queen thought he was ordinary. Until his true power shattered her world. The meeting happened 3 days later. Velshera called it herself. No ceremony, no formal announcement. She simply had Cole brought to a small room 2 levels below her main chamber, a private room, off the usual corridors, with one viewport and a low table and nothing else. She was already there when he arrived. So was Zethrael, standing near the door with his arms folded, watching everything. There was no translation box this time. Instead, a small device had been set on the table, a neural bridge, Cole had been told. Both parties had to agree to use it. It allowed something closer to direct understanding, not just word-for-word translation but intent, context, the texture of meaning. Cole had agreed immediately. Velshera, according to Zethrael, had agreed after a long pause. They sat across from each other. The neural bridge hummed very softly. When Velshera spoke, Cole understood her clearly, not just the words but the weight behind them. She said that she had reviewed his notebook. All 17 improvements he had written down. She had given them to her engineering team. They had verified all 17. Every single one was correct. Cole said he was glad. She said she was not glad. She said she was something more complicated than glad. She said it was very difficult to spend 6,000 years believing your civilization was the highest form of organized intelligence in the known galaxy, and then sit in a room with a creature your own analysts had filed as nothing, and feel uncertain. Cole said he understood that. He said he did not mean to make her feel uncertain. She said, "What did you mean to do?" He said, "I meant to go home." She looked at him. The neural bridge made her expression easier to read. She was not angry. She was something more honest than anger. She was grappling. The way a very intelligent person grapples when the world has just shown them a shape they do not have a category for. She said, "You planned this from the first day." From the holding room. He said, "I planned it from the engine bay." She was quiet. Outside the viewport, the stars were doing what stars always do, burning steadily, enormous and indifferent, holding their positions in the dark. Cole said, "I am not your enemy. I was never your enemy. I am a man who fixes things for a living, and I was put on your ship, and I did what I know how to do. If anything on this ship runs better because of what I did, and it does, then we both got something out of this. That seems like a reasonable place to start a conversation." Velshera looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "What do you want in return for the 17 improvements?" Cole said, "Freedom for all 12 people from the Delmar Cross. A formal acknowledgement that humanity is not Class 0. And one piece of Dominari engineering documentation, anything you are willing to share, as a gesture that this is a beginning and not an ending." She said, "That is very little." He said, "I know what I need. I do not need more than that." She said, "And if I offer more?" He said, "Then we can talk about it on the shuttle home." Something shifted in her face. It was not a smile, not the way a human smiled. It was something subtler, a change around her flat alien eyes that suggested a kind of recognition. She had spent 6,000 years at the top of a structure built on certainty. Cole was showing her something she had not seen before, someone who had every reason to demand a great deal and had chosen to ask only for what was enough. She said, "Agreed." Zethrael, by the door, said nothing. But Cole noticed that the commander let out a slow, quiet breath. The next day, Velshera addressed her full council. She did not soften anything. She stood before her senior officers and explained, in plain terms, what had happened over the past 6 weeks. She told them that a human, a cargo mechanic from a civilian transport vessel, filed as Class 0 in every standard assessment, had come aboard the Velkasha and had, without any resources beyond observation and a paper notebook, improved the ship's performance, stabilized the captive labor population, and positioned himself to negotiate from a place of demonstrated value. She told them she was releasing the humans. She told them humanity's classification was being changed. The council chamber was silent for a long time when she finished. Senior officers who had served for decades looked at each other without speaking. Some of them looked uncomfortable. A few of them looked like they were doing the same thing Velshera had been doing for 3 days, rearranging something in their minds, trying to fit a new shape into a space that had not been designed for it. One of the officers finally said, "What do we classify them as?" Velshera said, "I do not know yet. I will tell you when I have the right word." On the morning of the release, Cole and Dara and the 10 remaining crew members of the Delmar Cross were walked to the shuttle bay. Gary was already there. He had been held separately for most of the time and looked thin but steady. They did not speak much. There was something about being about to leave that made words feel unnecessary. Cole carried his toolkit. He carried his notebook. He had been given the promised Dominari engineering document, a data chip the size of his thumbnail that contained, he was told, the basic specifications for a tertiary propulsion stabilizer. He had tucked it into the small inner pocket of his vest and buttoned it closed. Zethrael walked them to the shuttle bay himself. At the door, he stopped Cole with a hand on his shoulder, not a grip, just a touch, brief and deliberate. Cole turned. Zethrael looked at him with his flat alien eyes and said, through the translation box at his belt, I read your full assessment file again this morning. The original one. From the survey ship. Cole said, what did it say? Zethrael said, it said you were unremarkable. No threat indicators. No special classification. Cole said, that sounds about right. Zethrael said, it does not. He paused. You were never unremarkable. We simply did not know what we were looking at. Cole looked at him. Then he held out his hand, open palm, an offering of nothing but itself. Zethrael looked at the hand for a moment, then reached out and pressed his own against it in the closest gesture he had. Cole got on the shuttle. As the shuttle pulled away from the Velkasha, Dara sat beside Cole and looked out the small porthole at the vast gray ship shrinking behind them. After a while she said, were you scared? At any point in all of that? Cole thought about it genuinely. He looked at his hands, at the toolkit case between his feet, at the notebook tucked in his vest. He said, once. When they took my notebook. She looked at him. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the first real one in weeks, bright and sudden and filling the small cabin. Some of the others looked up. A few of them smiled, not sure why, but feeling the relief of it anyway. Cole smiled too. Back on the Velkasha, Velshera stood alone in her private chamber. The ship hummed around her, steadier than it had been in some time. She pulled up a new file on her console. She titled it, Human Species, Revised Assessment. She sat for a long time in front of the blank page. She thought about a man in a work vest with a paper notebook and a toolkit, sitting calmly on a bench in a processing room while everything around him was designed to make him feel small. She thought about every small thing he had done, and how none of it had looked like power while it was happening, and how all of it clearly was. She began to write. She did not write about threat levels or classification scores. She wrote about patience. She wrote about the kind of intelligence that does not announce itself. She wrote about a species that, when placed in an impossible situation, does not rage and does not collapse, but simply looks around and asks, what can I learn here? What can I fix? She wrote for a long time. 2 years later, a Dominari diplomatic vessel docked at a human outer station for the first joint trade summit in the history of either civilization. The lead Dominari envoy stepped off the ship and asked, by name, for the human technical consultant assigned to the summit. The man who walked in was wearing work clothes and carrying a notebook. He sat down across the table and opened it to a fresh page and looked up. The Dominari envoy looked at him for a moment. Then he said, in careful, deliberate standard, I read your file again before this meeting. You were never ordinary. Cole Hargrove clicked his pen and said, no. We never are. He put the pen to the page and they got to work.